Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin, remember to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps us bring you more unsettling tales to whisper you into uneasy dreams. Now settle in and listen closely. It was late October of 1999, in the quiet village of Harleston, Norfolk. The autumn wind swept through the flat countryside, carrying with it the smell of damp soil and the faint, dry rustle of corn stalks from the field behind our old farmhouse. I was 13, my brother Daniel only 9. Our parents had moved us there from London the year before, saying it would be a slower pace of life. But life here didn't feel slower. It felt heavier, as if the air itself carried old secrets no one talked about. Behind our house stretched an overgrown garden, then a low stone wall, and beyond that, the cornfield. It wasn't large by farming standards, but the stalks grew tall and close together, swaying even when the air was still. From my bedroom window, it looked like a sea of gold in the day, but at night, it turned black, a jagged silhouette against the sky. Daniel had been spending more time outside than usual. Every afternoon after school, he would disappear into the garden, sometimes for hours, and I'd find him kneeling in the dirt, muttering quietly to himself. When I asked who he was talking to, he'd glance toward the cornfield and say, "Elliot." At first, I thought Elliot was just another imaginary friend, harmless. But then he told me Elliot didn't live in our house. Elliot lived in the field. On a dull, overcast Thursday, I came home to find Daniel digging near the far end of the garden, just a few feet from the wall that bordered the cornfield. He had one of Dad's old trowels and a small pile of upturned earth beside him. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping closer. Without looking up, he said, "Elliot says something's buried here." The wind shifted, and the tall stalks behind the wall gave a slow, dry shiver. I frowned. "Something like what?" Daniel's small hands kept working the soil. He didn't say what, just that it's his. "And we need to dig before she comes back." I wanted to ask who she was, but before I could, I noticed it. A figure, standing just beyond the wall, half hidden between the stalks. Tall, still, with its head slightly tilted toward us. I blinked, and it was gone. Daniel didn't seem to notice. He leaned closer to the hole he'd made, brushing away clumps of dirt until something metallic caught the light. He reached down and pulled it free. A small, rusted tin box, the edges warped and the lid dented. He smiled faintly. "Elliot says this is just the start." A sudden gust rattled the cornfield, the sound like 1,000 whispers rushing through dry leaves. That's when I heard it. A voice. Low, faint, but unmistakable. Not Daniel's. Not mine. From the field. It said my name. Daniel didn't react to the voice. If he heard it at all, he acted as though it were nothing more than the wind. He brushed soil from the tin box and turned it over in his hands, the metal cold and darkened with age. The wind died suddenly. The field stood still. The absence of movement was worse than the rustling. It was as if everything had stopped to listen. "Open it," Daniel said. His tone was casual, but I noticed he didn't reach for the lid himself. I knelt beside him, my knees pressing into the damp earth. The box was heavier than it looked. I pulled at the lid, but it wouldn't give. My fingers slipped on the rust. I tried again, forcing the edge up with my thumb until the metal groaned. The smell hit me first. Damp metallic, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowed cloth, was a silver locket. The chain was knotted and broken in 2 places, the surface tarnished, but still catching what little light came through the clouds. Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's it," he whispered, as though repeating someone else's words. "Elliot's?" I asked, keeping my voice low without quite knowing why. He nodded, clutching the locket in his small fist. "He says we have to take it to the middle, before dark." "The middle of what?" I said, though I already guessed the answer. Daniel looked over the wall toward the cornfield. The stalks stood taller here, their dry leaves curled and sharp. The wall itself was only waist-high, easy enough for us to climb. I should have told him no. I should have taken the box, the locket, and marched us both back to the house. But there was something in the way he looked at the field, a mixture of determination and fear, that made my own voice falter. The cloud shifted, and a pale light broke through, falling on the wall like a path. Without another word, Daniel scrambled over. I hesitated, glancing back toward the farmhouse. The windows reflected only the gray sky, empty and still. Then I followed. The field closed around us the moment we stepped inside. The stalks towered overhead, blocking the horizon. The ground was uneven, soft in some places and hard as stone in others, as though something had been buried beneath the rows. Daniel moved quickly, following a path I couldn't see. He didn't look back. I had to keep close just to see him through the shifting stalks. The air felt heavier here, carrying the scent of old soil and something faintly sweet, the same smell from the box. After several minutes, we came to a small clearing no larger than our living room. The stalks here were bent outward, forming a rough circle. In the center stood a scarecrow, its head a sackcloth bag stained with dark patches, its arms stretched wide as though in welcome. The clothes hanging from its frame were torn and waterlogged, as if it had been left out through decades of storms. Daniel stopped at the edge of the circle. He held up the locket. The wind returned, sudden and sharp, rattling the stalks in a single direction, toward the scarecrow. "He says to hang it there," Daniel murmured. I stared at the figure. The sackcloth head had no features, no stitched eyes or mouth, yet I had the awful sensation it was watching us. "This is stupid," I said, though my voice cracked. "Let's just go." Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he stepped into the circle. The ground under his feet seemed to sink slightly, as though it were softer here. When he reached the scarecrow, he tried to loop the locket around its neck, but the chain slipped from his fingers and fell into the grass. He bent to pick it up. That was when I saw the hand. It emerged from the soil beside him, pale and thin, fingers long and claw-like. It reached upward, grasping at the hem of his jumper. "Daniel!" I shouted, running forward. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back, just as the ground where he'd been standing began to split. Something was pushing up from beneath. Not quickly, but with a steady, deliberate force. We stumbled out of the circle. The scarecrow swayed, though there was no wind now. The soil in front of it cracked open further, revealing the shape of a head beneath the dirt. Daniel's face was pale. He still clutched the locket. "He says we woke her up." "Her who?" I demanded. He turned to me slowly. "The one who took him." The stalks around the clearing rustled again, but not in the way the wind moves them. It was more controlled, more like something brushing through deliberately, circling us. I caught glimpses between the rows. A tall figure, moving without sound, its shape bending as it passed behind the stalks. "Run," I said. We plunged into the field, the narrow gaps between the stalks tearing at our clothes. I could hear footsteps behind us, light, deliberate, always keeping pace. No matter how we turned, the sound stayed just behind my right shoulder. The wall appeared suddenly, low and uneven. Daniel scrambled over first, dropping into the garden on the other side. I followed, my hands scraping against the stone. When I looked back, the cornfield was still. The figure was gone. But in the exact spot we had climbed out, the stalks leaned forward slightly, as though something unseen was standing there, waiting. Daniel's breathing slowed. He looked at the locket in his hand, then at me. "Elliot says we can't stop now," he whispered. I wanted to demand he tell me everything. But before I could speak, the wind rose again, and from deep in the field came the sound of something knocking. 4 slow, deliberate knocks, a pause, then 4 more. That night, Daniel didn't sleep in his room. He sat at his desk, the locket resting in front of him, watching the window that faced the field. I woke around 3 in the morning to find him still there, eyes fixed on the dark outline of the corn beyond the wall. The knocks came again, faint but clear through the glass. And this time, I think I heard my name. The sound didn't fade. It came in sets, 4 knocks, pause, for knocks again. The rhythm was steady, deliberate, and far too even to be the wind. I lay there listening, staring at the ceiling, each knock making my stomach tighten a little more. At some point, I realized Daniel was no longer in his room. The chair at his desk sat empty, the locket gone. My first thought was to check Mum and Dad's room, but their door was closed, the light off, no sign that they had heard anything at all. I padded downstairs, every step of the wooden staircase creaking under my weight. The knocks were louder now, as if I were walking toward them. The kitchen smelled faintly of soil. A cold draft seeped through the back door, which was ajar by just a finger's width. Outside, the garden was bathed in thin moonlight, the frost making the grass shimmer. Daniel was standing by the wall at the far end, the locket dangling from his hand. He didn't turn when I whispered his name. His gaze was fixed on the cornfield. "They want me to bring it," he said quietly. I shook my head. "We're not going back there." He finally looked at me. In the moonlight, his face seemed pale in a way that wasn't just cold. His eyes were wider, the skin under them shadowed. "It's Elliot. He's scared. She's getting closer." Before I could answer, something moved in the field. The stalks swayed, parting slightly, and I saw a shape, tall, narrow, shifting just enough to catch the light. It didn't step forward. It just stood there, waiting. I took Daniel's arm, intending to pull him back to the house. But he was stronger than I expected. He stepped onto the wall and dropped into the field. The knock stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick and heavy, as though the night itself was holding its breath. I climbed over after him, the frost crunching under my boots. The row swallowed us immediately, the path closing behind. The cold seemed sharper here, biting through my clothes. I called Daniel's name, but my voice was muffled, swallowed by the stalks. When I found him, he was standing in another clearing, not the same as before, but with the same unnatural circle where the stalks bent outward. In the center lay the scarecrow's head, the sackcloth torn open and empty. The body was nowhere to be seen. Daniel knelt and placed the locket on the frozen ground. The moment he let go, the air shifted. From beneath the soil came the faintest sound, a scraping, as though something inside was trying to claw its way out. The rows around us rustled. Shapes began to emerge from between the stalks, thin, human-like, but with movements too slow, too deliberate. Their faces were obscured, either by shadow or something they wore over their heads. Daniel stood, his voice low but clear. "She's here." A figure stepped into the clearing, taller than any of the others, draped in tattered black fabric that trailed along the ground. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its gaze, cold and heavy, settling on both of us. It stopped by the locket. Slowly, it reached down with a pale hand and picked it up. The chain dangled from its fingers. Daniel didn't move. The figure tilted its head as if considering him. Then, without warning, it took a step forward, toward me. The cold deepened. My breath clouded in front of me. My feet wouldn't move, as if the ground itself had frozen around them. The figure raised its hand, the locket swinging like a pendulum. Then it spoke. The voice was not a whisper, not a growl, but something in between, layered, as though several people were speaking at once. It said my name. The sound broke whatever was holding me. I grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him back through the rows, running blindly. The stalks tore at my sleeves, and the ground seemed to shift underfoot, making every step uneven. I could hear movement behind us, but it was impossible to tell how close it was. The rustling seemed to come from everywhere at once. The wall appeared ahead, and I shoved Daniel over before scrambling after him. My hand slipped on the stone, and for a moment I thought something had closed around my ankle. I kicked free and tumbled into the garden. We didn't stop running until we were inside. The door bolted, the curtains drawn tight. Mom and Dad never woke up. They said later they'd slept straight through the night. The next morning, the frost was gone from the grass, except for a single patch by the wall, where two sets of footprints led from the cornfield to our garden. One set was ours. The other was longer, the steps evenly spaced, and they didn't stop at the wall. They ended halfway across the garden, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. That day, Daniel was quiet. He didn't go near the wall or the field. The locket was gone, and when I asked, he said he hadn't taken it back to his room. That night, the knocks started again. For knocks. Pause. For knocks. And this time, they were coming from inside the garden. The knocks came again, for slow, hollow sounds that seemed to reverberate through the damp night air. The pause was longer this time, stretching just far enough to let dread settle in before it started again. Daniel sat upright in his bed, eyes wide, as if he had been waiting for it. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether I'd woken because of the noise or because something had nudged me awake. The sound was clearer now, not muffled by walls. It was close, far too close. We crept downstairs without speaking. The house was colder than it had been the night before, the kind of chill that didn't belong to the season. The living room curtains swayed slightly, though the windows were shut. The knocks came once more, this time from directly outside the back door. I took a step toward it, but Daniel caught my sleeve. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't open it. She's not supposed to be in yet." The words chilled me more than the knocks. "What do you mean, not supposed to?" He shook his head and glanced at the window that faced the garden. The frost had returned, though it hadn't been there at dusk. A thin layer clung to the glass, and through it I could just make out a shadow standing near the wall. Tall, motionless, facing the house. The shadow didn't move even when the knocks stopped. Daniel turned to me, his voice flat. "She can come in if we ask her." I swallowed hard. "And Elliot told you that?" his lips pressed together. He didn't answer. The shadow stayed there until dawn, never shifting, never fading, only vanishing when the first light of morning hit the frost. We thought daylight might break whatever this was, but by mid-morning the air in the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mom complained of headaches. Dad said the house felt damp, though it hadn't rained in days. Daniel wouldn't eat breakfast. He just sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window toward the cornfield. When I asked him what he was looking at, he said, "She's walking the rows, looking for the next place to dig." I told him to stop. He just kept staring. By nightfall, the knocks returned. Not from the garden this time, but from inside the walls. The sound started in the kitchen, then moved to the hallway, slow and deliberate, always in sets of 4. Daniel followed the sound as if in a trance. I tried to hold him back, but his small frame slipped easily from my grip. It led him to the attic. The attic door was a narrow panel in the hallway ceiling, one that had always been stiff to open. Daniel reached up and tugged at the cord, and to my shock, it slid down without resistance. A smell drifted down, damp earth and something sweet, cloying like rotting fruit. He started to climb the ladder. I grabbed his ankle. "We're not going up there." "She says Elliot's waiting," he replied, his voice almost not his own. I wanted to shout, to wake Mum and Dad, but the air was so heavy, my voice caught in my throat. The knock stopped. The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the faint shift of wood above us, as if someone, or something, was moving in the attic. I pulled Daniel back down. The cord to the attic door swayed, gently even though there was no draft. We shut it, and I wedged a chair beneath it. Neither of us slept. At around 2 in the morning, the sound changed. No more knocks, just scratching, a slow, steady scrape, moving across the ceiling above our rooms. Then it stopped, right above Daniel's bed. He whispered into the dark. I couldn't make out the words. The next day, I checked the attic when the sun was high. Dust coated the beams, and old boxes sat where they'd always been. But in one far corner, the dust was disturbed. There was a shallow depression in the boards, filled with what looked like soil from the field. That night, Daniel disappeared again. I found the back door wide open, frost coating the threshold. Footprints, his small ones, and another set longer and deeper, led toward the cornfield. I followed, my breath clouding the air, each step crunching in the frozen grass. The field seemed darker than the rest of the night. The stalks shifted though there was no wind. I pushed through, following the prints until they stopped in a clearing. The scarecrow had returned, its sackcloth head replaced, though the stitches were fresh. In one of its hands, tied to the wrist with a broken chain, hung the locket. Daniel stood beside it, looking up. He didn't acknowledge me. "She says it's my turn now," he murmured. I stepped forward, grabbing his arm, but the ground beneath us gave way. Not collapsing, but sinking, pulling our feet down into the soft, cold earth. Shapes moved in the rows, closing in, their pale hands reaching between the stalks. Something cold brushed my cheek. I turned and saw her. Closer now, I could see the fabric of her shroud was stitched from sackcloth like the scarecrow's head, fraying at the edges, and beneath it, the faint outline of a face that wasn't quite human. Her hand reached for Daniel. I pulled him free with a force I didn't know I had. We ran, the earth clinging to our shoes, the figures in the rows keeping pace, but never quite stepping into the clearing. We didn't stop until we were back at the wall. When we climbed over, the garden was empty. No frost, no footprints. The door was closed. The house was warm. But when we looked back, the cornfield was gone. In its place was a wide, empty expanse of black soil, stretching all the way to the horizon. The next morning, the field was back, as if it had never changed. Mom and Dad noticed nothing unusual. But Daniel hasn't spoken about Elliot since, and he avoids the back of the garden entirely. Still, some nights, I hear the knocks. For again. And sometimes, when I look from my bedroom window, the scarecrow is facing the house. Weeks passed without incident. The frost no longer formed in the garden, and the nights felt lighter somehow. I started to believe it was over, that whatever had happened in the field had stayed there. Then, one rainy afternoon, I was helping Dad clear out the old shed at the far corner of the property. Under a stack of warped floorboards, I found a tin box, rusted shut. Inside were photographs black and white, the edges curled with age. The first few were of the farm, taken decades ago. The house, the cornfield, the garden wall. But near the bottom was one that froze me in place. It showed a boy, about Daniel's age, standing in the exact same spot by the wall where he'd once spoken to Elliot. The boy's clothes were old-fashioned, his hair neat, his expression vacant. Behind him, at the edge of the cornfield, was a figure draped in tattered black cloth. The date on the back read October 12th, 1937. That night, the frost returned to the grass, and from somewhere beyond the wall, for slow knocks echoed through the dark.